Hello, everyone. This is Lupe Munoz.
And I'm Steve McKeon, and welcome to the Leadership Exchange.
Today, we are going to try to provide a different perspective. We actually had a listener reach out to us about the podcast. After a few exchanges, we realized that this individual probably would be a great individual to have on our podcast because we felt he'd really give a great perspective. If you've been listening to us, we are trying to focus on providing resources, providing information, I guess you could say, to leaders, to up-and-coming leaders, those individuals that really may not have the access that maybe we have to a lot of training, et cetera. And we're lucky we stumbled onto this gentleman, a gentleman by the name of Kyle Goodbred. This gentleman is a sub-warfare officer in the United States Navy since 2015. He has a great perspective from his experience within the naval program. He is also an instructor with Submarine Tactics in Norfolk, Virginia, and he has a master's degree in engineering management from Duke University. Welcome to the show, Kyle.
Thank you very much, Lupe. Proud to be here. And yeah, excited to kick this discussion off through listening to the podcast. Definitely picked up on some awesome tips and tricks. And yeah, just excited to share my experiences and open a discussion with you two.
Kyle, thanks again for joining. And if you could, like to expand just a little bit on your background and just tell the folks listening a little bit more about who you are and what you'd like to share to kind of start us off.
Absolutely, Steve. So just going back with sort of my professional development, started in undergraduate with my biology degree from Moravian College. Came out of that, started with a role in quality assurance at a beverage industry, actually, and really just wasn't feeling all that much excitement about what I was doing. I didn't feel like I was really contributing all that much. So I went out, did some research, and found myself being pulled towards military service. So again, like you said, Lupe, in 2015, signed my name on the dotted line and got picked for submarine service. So what that entailed was going through all of the nuclear training involved, because on each of our submarines, we do have a nuclear reactor. Through that, really got able to hone my sort of engineering side and technical side. And then once I got to the submarine, that's really when leadership sort of took over there. And they try to do a good job of prepping us for that, but it really is drinking from a fire hose. I know you gentlemen have said that a couple times on the podcast.
Oh, yeah.
Right. When you're thrown into a situation as a new leader, you really have to learn as you're going, sort of a trial by fire. And so I did that. I was stationed on a fast attack submarine in Norfolk, and recently I've transitioned into an instructor role at one of our learning sites. And again, as you mentioned, I'm trying to get my engineering management degree on the side from Duke.
We really appreciate the service that you've provided to our nation. Maybe you can start us off with a story. I know we talked about a few potential ones. I thought, one of the things that I feel leaders always encounter is the onboarding piece. Like, hey, I'm joining a new team. I have no credibility with them. Maybe you have a story about that in your experience and kind of what you had to deal with and what helped maybe.
Absolutely, Lupe. I'd be happy to share. When I first arrived on board my submarine, I was assigned to be the division officer, basically the manager of electrical division. These gentlemen had been working with all the various electronic equipment and the actual electrical distribution plant on board the submarine. Very highly technical work, a lot of maintenance involved. And here I am, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, showing up, and now I'm in charge of them. And so just like you said, starting off with zero street cred. They don't know me from Adam. What I found was really tough is when you're dealing with a group of individuals who are as technically competent, right? They demand a level of knowledge when you're coming to them and ask questions. You can't act like you don't know what's going on. So I kind of felt a little bit baffled by that in the beginning, intimidated, so to speak. But what I learned is really what's the most important thing in that situation is making sure that I'm doing my job right. And whether that be something as simple as balancing their schedule or getting them the resources that they need, interfacing with the higher ups and doing the job of a manager, So that way, then once that's done, I can go and sort of earn that credibility with them, because then they get to see me doing what is sort of, I'll say, constructive to building my sense of caring for them. And I've heard people say this before, that nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And I felt like that has served me right in a couple different experiences. And especially with them, once they saw that I was willing to go the extra mile for them, they then started to take me under their wing, really teach me the ins and outs of what they were doing. And it really helped strengthen me in that regard as an engineering leader as well.
That's a great story, Kyle.
Yeah, I like that story, Kyle. In some cases, well, at least maybe you're probably smarter than me, Kyle. So, in some cases, I've stepped into situations where, like, the people that I'm leading as a team are probably smarter than me, and
Mm-hmm.
and so you're right. You've got to figure out how am I going to contribute to the team, right? Now, in that particular experience, Kyle, did you feel like you were able to contribute right away? Was there a learning curve and a time that you had to kind of acclimate to the team? How did that work for you?
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head there with learning curve. And with that, I'll say that there also was an expectations curve of me from them. Somebody who I heavily relied on that team was the senior enlisted personnel, right? So, sort of basic Navy structure for that, there will be an enlisted chief who understands all the ins and outs of that maintenance and understands that I'm coming in as an officer and don't really know that yet. So, he did a very good job of helping me with the basic building blocks. But then as the months and the years progressed, expecting more and more. And that also helped me feel more empowered to do more for the division. Starting off, again, I wasn't getting involved in things like maintenance and troubleshooting, but by the end, I was there side by side with my chief, briefing our commanding officer on high stakes maintenance. And I felt like I was actually qualified to do so. And that was only possible by having the buy in from the team. Again, you hit the nail on the head with sort of that learning curve. But with that, you have to sort of take the onus on yourself and understand, hey, if they're gonna accept me at this lower level of understanding at the beginning, they're gonna expect that on the back end, somebody to give them that technical support as well.
That's a great example, Kyle. And I love that about the U.S. military, how they're able to take individuals. You think about tenure in a manufacturing facility or a mature business, middle management, senior management typically are going to be 40s, maybe late 30s, all the way into 50s and 60s. And their responsibilities are equal to young military leaders that are coming in, and going through the process of, especially on ships, right? Assuming ownership of a ship and some really important duties. And I've always been, because I had a chance to work side by side with the military during my defense contracting days, but the chiefs are just the most amazing group of individuals that, the ones that are good and excellent in their jobs are the ones that have that ability to, bring in the young leaders and quickly develop them so that they're functional. And then from there, like, as you mentioned, then there's that kind of payback as you start to remove the obstacles that are kind of out of their lane to handle. But that's a really good example of what you've shared. I guess the question I have as a young leader, what are the challenges that you see out there from a leadership perspective, and what value have you been able to kind of draw out of this podcast?
One of the things that I've seen as a leader that's starting off and now sort of hitting this, I'll say maybe like a middle patch. I feel like I've been a young leader and I'm still very young in respect to people who are writing books and stuff like that. But I've got a couple years under my belt, and I found that to my surprise, the challenges, while they are different when you are a young leader, leaders are facing these all the time, right? And when you enter into a new situation, uh, I've often called upon those experiences that I had as a young leader to sort of guide me through there. And so one of the things that I found kind of tough as a young leader is when you start to feel that you've set your foundation correctly. Like we talked about, okay, I've got my actual managerial role down. And now I understand how I can support my team to new heights, right? I can make them better. How do I keep driving myself to get better? Once I start to feel comfortable, right, that little bell goes off in the back of your head saying, don't get comfortable. Being comfortable is not okay. You need to keep getting better, especially for me. I love learning. And I think part of being a leader, you always want to, if you're not improving your team necessarily, you want to be improving yourself. And if you can do both, that's great. So I'll bring up an experience that I had. I was on hold for a short period of time during my nuclear training, and I was afforded the opportunity to go and work with the Air Force. And one of my mentors over there, while he was explaining to me how to hit the ground running, I was working in a totally new, basically, department. I was working for finance. Never done finance before, had no training. And so I asked, okay, so how do I do this job? And he said, well, make your boss look good. And I said, what does that mean? No, how do I do my job? And he basically explained that if I can make my boss or whoever I report to, if I can make their job easier, not only will I be getting better, right? Because you start to raise your level of understanding and raise your view on things, but then also you'll be increasing your own prowess for that next role. I think that's one of the things as young leaders, we sometimes get things put in front of us. Here's the black and white. Here's what I need you to accomplish. And then when you're trying to figure out how do I keep moving up or how do I keep making myself better, that can be tough. So I would offer that to young leaders who are stuck in that position to look up at those who are above you, and whether you believe that they may be deserving of it or not, right? Try to make their job a little bit easier, because it'll be better for the team and you really will be bettering yourself.
That's a great example, and it reminds me of a book that Lupe and I have read and use a lot of times in leadership development. It's Your Ship, which is interesting since you are also a person from the Navy, and Mike Abershoff, the commander, the boat at the time that he came into, just really interesting story about how he turned the just the environment around the Bentonville, I think was the ship he was on, and just, what that's done. And it brought me to kind of another thought that I had. I was talking to a leader within the organization that Lupe and I currently work at, and she's moved into a new role, and, excited about the new role, but also, misses part of her old role. And so as we were talking about that, it reminded me of a book called The Elegant Solution, which was a book about innovation within the Toyota production system. And there's a spot in that book where the author talks about an individual who started into a new job, new role, and really felt uncomfortable because there wasn't a lot of direct guidance, and he wasn't sure of his career forward. Like, where would he kind of make his mark and move forward? And it was interesting. His mentor and leader at the time, basically said, hey, it's your job. You decide what it is you want to do, and things you liked from old job that you want to bring into this one, you should bring those in. And then, to the point you make, Kyle, about learning, just, dig in and start learning. Don't wait to be told. And I just think that's, really good advice for anybody moving into a new career, or any, new leader in an organization. Thanks for sharing your story there. I guess the other question that we had, well, we got a lot of questions for you. In your experience, what is the biggest aspect of leadership that's missing from leaders out there that you've worked with? Because you've had both good examples probably within the civilian jobs that you've had, but also within the military. And you don't have to call anybody out, but we're just curious, what's missing from leaders out there that you've been able to identify?
One of the things that I've definitely felt has affected me the most as one of the young leaders, where typically tasking sort of falls to, right? Where you're told, hey, here's a problem, I need you to go fix it, is a lot. I will not say a lot. Some leaders have a very difficult time with effective delegation. And I feel like that absolutely affects not only young leaders, but if you aren't able to learn what effective delegation looks like, that is going to become a continuous trickle down effect, and a negative one at that. So I think that sort of comes in two parts there. One is, as somebody who is delegating, is to remember what it's like to be on the receiving end of those marching orders, right? If you're telling somebody to go and get you a rock, tell them that you want a blue round rock, so that way you're not upset when they bring you a red triangle rock. Giving those sort of that commander's intent, if you will, those guiding directions along the way, because effective delegation can really lighten the stress on the people beneath you. If you are an ineffective delegator, it really adds unwanted and unnecessary waste, whether that be effort, time, or stress on an individual to your team. And then, sort of hand in hand with that, by remembering what it's like to be on the receiving end, and this one is a much more basic human factor, so to speak, is humility. We talked before about how young leaders come in and we're expected to have some level of technical expertise, but it's understood that you're not going to have that. But being able to be humble in those moments and try to accept criticism, etc. So again, with delegation, as long as you can remain humble when somebody brings you a product that may not fit the bill, admitting, I also did not have a good idea of what I wanted this to be. Let's work through this together. Or, I don't know, just somehow framing those things to make it seem like it's more of a team effort rather than a one-on-one interaction.
Sure. And I think, sharing the humility in that way where you just kind of open yourself up that, yeah, I really didn't provide the right detail, or I wasn't really sure either. I really like that approach. And it's important, I think, for leaders to learn early in their career, but also remember throughout their career, as you continue to grow and lead new teams. Thank you for that story.
Yeah, great story, Kyle. The word that comes to mind is being inclusive. I think, as a leader, being inclusive and always saying, hey, we can do things together. You're not on your own. Inclusion, I think, can mean a lot of different things, but I think in the context of this, I think it makes sense to me, at least, that you want to be an inclusive leader. Let me make sure I recap what I took away from your comments. Be good at effective delegation, have humility, and don't forget what it was like when you were going through as a young leader, right? As a developing leader. So those are really great items. And not to make a pitch, but I love that these are things that we've talked about during some aspect of our series, Steve. It gives me good comfort that these are some of the things that, Kyle, you've encountered and you feel are important and we're touching on. Is there anything that you can share with us that you've seen that have been done that are the opposite of the things you feel we should be doing as leaders? Anything you can share there for us?
Absolutely, Lupe. And to preface this, I'd like to say that almost every leader I've ever encountered has positive and negatives to the way that they do their job, right? We're all chosen to be leaders, or we choose to be leaders for good reasons. And I'll share a story about a situation where somebody who I was working with, who was leading the team that I was on, they have varied strengths, but in this particular scenario, something that was not a strength was conveying a sense of steadfastness or calm under stress. Now, being on a submarine, right, which at its core is a warship, being able to show that you can stay level-headed under stress is wildly important. During a fairly high stress transit, so to speak, a lot of things were at play, right? So we had a goal that we needed to accomplish. We were balancing that with safety of the ship. Maintenance needed to be going on. And to explain sort of the structure of how command and control works, just to lay the groundwork for the story, the officer of the deck, in that moment, everything flows through that one person. And so it is a very overwhelming job. And it's very easy to let all of those things that are coming in, if any of it is negative, right? It could be very easy to snap at somebody, especially when you're in the middle of something else. And so what I found for me is that I then took upon the role of trying to mitigate that, of acting as the person who could bring down the general excitement or that negative stress in the room, to a workable level, so that way we could still continue to be the excellent team that this very same leader had developed us into, right? And so one thing that kept coming up in the back of my mind, especially during that scenario, is to be a thermostat, not a thermometer. And I think that that's something that leaders can try to sort of put in their back pocket, is that you need to be the one setting the temperature of the room. You need to be the one who's sort of regulating everybody else, right? If you feel it getting too hot, blow some AC in there. If it's getting too cold, all right, bring everybody up a little bit. Because if you're a thermometer, you're going to be reactive, and you're not going to help everybody else. I think that sort of splits into 2 points. Is one, as a leader, I personally, having seen that, have really made an effort to, whenever I was in that role, or whenever I will be in that role in the future, is to catch myself. If I feel myself starting to get snappy or to be negative in my responses, so that way nobody else has to do that for me. But also, it helped me grow in that scenario, which I think is sort of the main theme of being a young leader, is taking something away from every experience that you have.
Yeah, I like that example, Kyle. That was the first time that I'd actually heard the reference to the being a thermometer or being a thermostat versus thermometer in our kind of pre-discussion to this podcast today, and that's really resonated with me. I think the other opportunity, as we have talked, and one of the things that you had brought up, and Lupe and I see this all the time, is just having that accountability partner out there, in that peer feedback loop that can give you that, hey, how did that go? They may not be able to interrupt at the time of, unless it's really urgent, but I think it's constantly looking to open yourself up to get that feedback, and then if you're the person that's giving the feedback, is to be honest with them. If it really was not a great performance, let them know, give them some pointers, and then help them get ready for the next event. I think all those things, creating that environment, like you said, so that you can control the energy level of the task at hand, goes a long way into being a successful leader and people person, right? Because we've all had good days and we've all had bad days. I mean, Lupe can tell you there's a couple times where, I just kind of, I got to the bottom of the accountability ladder. We haven't talked about that recently, but, and then I recognized it just by a couple comments that he'd made back to me, and got myself back up top. And that kind of feedback and the ability to receive it, I think it, as a leader at any level, is important. And I think as a young leader, and you probably experienced this as when you just started your Navy career, you think, hey, because I've got this assignment, they expect me to know all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And again, kind of go, shout out to the chiefs out there. The fact that they know that already, and a good chief's going to tell you right up front, hey, I'm here to help you with all these technical things you don't know yet, so please listen. That relationship there, really helps young leaders in any of the military organizations, be successful. Lupe, do you got another question you want to throw out there to Kyle?
Well, I want to make a statement for the record to say that I'm always on my A game. So I don't know what you're talking about when you say that, sometimes we don't have, no, you're right. Steve's great at helping me out in those times when I need a lift. I'm also sometimes wanting to set up a little mini camp down on the bottom of the accountability ladder. So I always appreciate you for that, Steve. So Kyle, you mentioned, you've been listening to this podcast. We love that you're getting value out of it. We appreciate you continuing to listen to it. What recommendations do you have for young leaders that want to be better leaders, or let's say even great leaders? Any other podcasts that you listen to, books or other resources that maybe you could recommend to them that you feel could add value to their development?
One of the things that I have found throughout my young and continuing journey as a leader is I always struggled to find things that really sort of felt like they resonated with me. I would go to these leadership seminars, and it felt like the same 5 things were being talked about over and over again, because there weren't a lot of experiences that were shared or anecdotes that I could really resonate with. So first off, I think that this podcast, your podcast, Lupe and Steve, has done an excellent job of doing that, of associating, hey, here's a reading that we did. Here's sort of the framework for how this spells out to handle XYZ situation. And here are personal anecdotes on how that was accomplished. Specifically, the How to Build Trust as a Leader episode, I think really hit the nail on the head for that one. And then as far as things that I would personally recommend to those who are continuing their leadership journey is actually a book that you mentioned on this very last podcast, The Five Dysfunctions of a Team by Lencioni. One, because it sort of sets up those red flags. And then two, if you are starting your journey on a dysfunctional team, it's hard to know what right looks like. I actually have a kind of a funny personal story about this. When I was on my first deployment, I did not know that I was on a dysfunctional team. And then there's this little red book sitting over on our Submarine library bookshelf. I went and picked it up, and it was Five Dysfunctions of a Team. And so I read through that, and it really opened my eyes to what could potentially be going wrong and how to make it better. So definitely that's a recommended read. But then additionally, you have other peers around you, right? So if you can find like minds who are also striving to make themselves better as leaders, use each other as a resource. You either have shared experiences through your common workplace or you have experiences from before. And as long as you're both open to receiving some of that feedback, I believe it was either Lupe or Steve, I can't remember earlier when you talked about that peer-to-peer ability to sort of sit back and give that feedback, both being open to giving it and then trusting the other person enough to give them feedback as well. I think is a great place to start, but definitely don't shy away from picking up a book and starting to read it. The first 90 days is a great one, right? For sort of onboarding, like we talked about before. But again,
Yeah, great start.
yeah, absolutely, Lupe. But also, not everything is for everybody. So if you pick up a book and you're not digging it, it doesn't mean that you're not supposed to be a leader. Just find somebody with another writing style or speaking style that can help you out there.
Yeah, that's great advice, Kyle. And the other thing that you said, and you said it kind of earlier in the podcast too, I'm just going to go back to it, but is the ability to kind of take what you've learned and then apply it, right? So it's an experiment that you're going to try with what you've learned. And there was one key, or not one key point, but several key points you made, but something I want to just go back and reflect on, because you started talking about this opportunity that you should constantly be looking to, if you're not growing the team, then look to grow yourself. If you're not growing the team and yourself, look to grow the organization. And, reminded me of the book, Lupe, that Gary Baudet just put out called Use Soils for Growth. And it's really, it talks about you cannot be a good leader if you're not willing to work on yourself, right? Work on the things that you need to improve. You can't be a good leader if you're not willing to give back to your team, to the Lencioni, episode of, or information around, those dysfunctions of a team. And then you're not going to help grow your organization. You're not bringing value if the work you're doing for yourself and your team is not really contributing to the bottom line. And so I really like that connection that you'd start to talk to, Kyle. And I know you haven't probably had a chance to look at Gary's book yet, but it just resonated with me, and I wanted to capture that point. Another thing that you had mentioned, in our kind of lead up to this call is what you would have liked to learn kind of first as a person that was just starting into a new career, whether it was on the commercial side, outside the military, or inside the military. And I don't know if you recall that conversation. You talked about, the not knowing exactly what you wanted to do, going through high.
Oh, and then looking up in a organization. Yeah.
If you could just go ahead and give us the what was kind of that first aha moment, and maybe not your first one, but just an important milestone aha moment for you early in your career.
One of the things that really helped me understand what I wanted to do, or at least how I wanted to be within the organization that I was in, and I'll frame this around my own personal experience again, starting off with that water business where I was doing quality assurance, and I found that the upward mobility there was going to be pretty good. I was able to move into a supervisory role and then a director role fairly quickly within the first year and a half I was there. And I decided to have the honest conversation with myself. Is this what I want to keep doing? And so I sort of turned my vision upwards in the company and the organization, and I did not see anything there that I desired, whether that was a form of, a challenge that I wanted to overcome, or the right kind of influence. I'd been in the organization long enough. Is this really the culture that I want to continue to be a part of? So I think that that's wildly important when you find yourself in those scenarios, is to look up, and hopefully, if you're in an organization that you cherish and you're trying to stay with, you can find, if it's not a particular person, some sort of an avenue to continue down. And then once you do find that, I think the next logical step would be to attempt to open a dialogue with persons in that avenue and establish potentially a mentor, just understanding what does it take to get there. Again, how can I better prepare myself for an opportunity like that? Or just open a dialogue and say, this is what I kind of see about what you do. What's your opinion on it? And what are the good things that you're getting out of it? Because maybe it's not being the, I don't know, director of consumer jumping jacks. Maybe you just really like working with high performing teams, right? And then you can sort of find that same
Yeah.
shade of blue somewhere else.
Yeah, and I think that's a good example, Kyle, because as you shared, then you'd already had some success as a leader, a growing leader in an organization, but you recognized at one point that really was not the right organization. And that'll happen as a leader out there. You have to really kind of do that check and make sure that you're going to be in that right environment, because I think the flip side of that, it's difficult for you to then be able to give back to others, right? For you to become that mentor and really kind of develop people that will follow you through their own personal career path and journey. And that kind of leads to another question. Just give us an example of maybe some mentoring that you've been doing, or some how you're training some new leaders that are coming into your organization now.
The role that I'm currently in as an instructor has afforded me incredible opportunities to do exactly what you just said. And it's one of the reasons why I fought so hard to get into this role, because on one hand, what I do, just to explain the job, is I work with submarine crews to incorporate the latest tactical doctrine, sort of increase their knowledge of foreign capabilities and our capabilities and how we can best interact with them, and then work on team dynamics. So that's one portion of it. And then the other portion is I actually work with junior officers and I lead them through 3 separate courses as they strive for qualification in submarines. On the one hand, when I'm working with the crews and I'm working with the command team of those submarines, that's a really good opportunity for sort of a little bit of give and take. Me saying, hey, this is what the doctrine says, and sort of talking with that framework and trying to help them hone their craft, but then having them tell me, here's the rationale, here's the leadership decision that I've made to carry my team forward. And so that's a really cool way, again, for me to keep that upward look and understand the mindset of those leaders who have already attained those higher leadership roles. And then on the other hand, when I'm working with junior officers who are doing the job that I had done only 3 years ago, I really take that as an opportunity to impart some of those lessons that I learned and to open that dialogue. And what I make sure is that nobody leaves there without my email or understanding how to reach back out to me, because whether they're on a different boat or they're in charge of a different team, leadership is leadership, right? And so you can always reach out and ask questions. And that is one of the things that I get the most joy out of on a day-to-day basis.
Great. Thanks for sharing. And I know we're starting to wind down here. I'll let you kind of start to close us out.
Want to reinforce what Kyle said, that our ability as leaders to pay it forward and make ourselves available and help other leaders. I feel like there's not a whole lot of things you can do in the world from a legacy standpoint as a leader than to do something like that. So kudos to you, Kyle, for having that mindset. I think you've provided us a really great perspective, and our listeners, I think, a really great perspective of some of the challenges and that perspective of the the up and coming leader. You have been a leader for a while, but as you said, it's a continuous journey. And I know myself personally, I still continue to work on becoming better leader than I am right now. So welcome to that community, Kyle. I guess, now that we've connected, really appreciate the knowledge that you've shared with us, the experiences and some of the stories. But I think at this point, we're going to wrap up. We do appreciate you continuing to listen to us, and we hope that we get some feedback from you as you see opportunity. But it's leaders like yourself that are really the reason why we do what we do on this podcast series. Steve, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that before we wrap up.
I think just to thank you, Kyle, for service to our country. I do admire the men and women of the armed forces greatly, especially after spending a lot of time, about 10 years of my career with the folks. So thanks again. And, just thank you for reaching out and being the kind of leader that you are. I think the more that leaders learn some of these skills early in their career, the more effective they're going to be. And, I'm curious. I did have one last question. Is it like mandatory reading now for you guys to read Turn Your Ship Around by Captain David Marquette?
Yes, it is not necessarily written in black and white, but when a nuclear submarine CEO writes a book like that, it becomes essentially mandatory reading, and it is such a great story and a great sort of dive into what he'd done there. So that's a great resource to bring up, Steve. Absolutely.
Great. Thank you. And Lupe and I love that book. We use it a lot in our leadership training. And so I really was hoping you were going to tell me that it is still part of the culture in the U.S. Navy. So that's great news.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you, Lupe and Steve, for the opportunity. Love being able to come on here and discuss all these topics with you. As we say in the Navy, bravo, Zulu. Good job with everything that you're doing with the leadership exchange, and know that I'll be out there listening. Great job, guys.
Yeah, thank you, Kyle.
Fantastic.
Appreciate it. And hopefully it's not our last time having you on as well. We'll look to stay connected and see what we can do to reconnect with you again in the future. Thanks again, and thanks to our listeners. This is Steve McKeon.
And this is Lupe Munoz for the Leadership Exchange. Have yourself a great day.